before we get started, I want to say something. Today is 4th of July, American Independence Day, and so I want to let you guys know two things. One, I'm grateful that we live in a country where we can celebrate God however we decide to, and it's because of people fighting for our freedoms to do that. But in the same breath, we are part of a kingdom that's ruled by a king. Jesus is that king of this kingdom. And so we're not going to preach a patriotic sermon today. We're not going to say the Pledge of Allegiance or sing God Bless the USA, because the most respectful thing that we can do for King Jesus is to worship him and not something else. And so that's, for me, the freedom that we get because of Independence Day. I'm grateful for the men and women that are in this room that fought for our freedom and those who are not here. But today is about Jesus. And so I'm grateful that you guys are here. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5 today. We're going to finish our series on Kingdom Restored. So have you ever seen one of those videos where people put on the colorblind people put on the glasses where they can see different colors? If you're one of the maybe 2 or 3 people that haven't seen that on the internet, basically what happens is there's people that are colorblind, if you're not aware of that. If you think back to your primary colors, there is red, green, and blue, right? I think red, green, and blue are the primary colors. Red, green, and yellow. That's it. Red, yellow, blue. Anyways, I don't know the primary colors. I'm just like, I click. That one looks pretty to me. Anyways, these people, most people can't distinguish between red and green. So you can imagine how difficult that is to drive. You're like, there's a light that is illuminated, but I'm not sure which one it is. Let's just go. Or get dressed, or these kinds of things. But they're not able to see all of the different aspects of the spectrum on the colors. And so what happens is they made these glasses where it helps their eyes see these. And when these guys and girls put these glasses on for the first time, they're able to see all of these colors. And you see grown men crying and weeping at the beauty of all of the colors that they can now see. And it's pretty amazing. And so what we have been doing is we've been a lot of time in these first few verses of Matthew chapter 5 talking about this kingdom restored by Jesus, right? And our prayer has been that it's unlocked some things that maybe you've never seen before as it pertains to these verses in the Beatitudes. Just like a new pair of glasses for these people that are colorblind, they're able to see things anew. Our prayer is that you've been able to see yourself in these verses a little bit different than maybe you've looked at them before, thought about them before. It's not about a new set of rules. It's not about a bunch of new practices or ways that we need to live. It's about us being accepted into the kingdom no matter what kind of baggage that we have. And so what I hope to do is to think about, in light of that, what do we do now? Right? In light of the poor in spirit and the meek and all of those people being accepted into the kingdom of God through what Jesus has done. In light of that, what do we do with all that information? Right? What is the purpose of that? And what I hope to do is help us be able to establish our purpose rooted in the purpose of Jesus today. So that's the goal of what we are going to try to do. But before we do that, we need to understand that purpose is important. And I don't know if you think about your own purpose much, but some people, that seems kind of overwhelming. You're like, Kyle, I don't know what we're doing next week, let alone next month, and you're trying to think about my purpose and what I'm going to do. That brings forth a panic attack in the depths of my soul. And then some of you are like, if I asked you what your purpose was, you have a vision statement for your life, right? There's polar extremes, right? But one thing we do know is that Jesus, he had a purpose. a very clear purpose, and he never took his eyes off of that purpose. And even when he was tired or hungry or even angry, it was all in line with his purpose, the reason he came. And so if you think back to the very, very beginning, the first page of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, we can see that Jesus was there because what we read in the New Testament, in Colossians chapter 1, it says that Jesus was creating, in verses 1:16, that by all things Jesus were created. By him all things were created. By Jesus all things were created. So Jesus was at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 1, creating all of these things. Which is important because Jesus knew that the creation was going to rebel against what he made, this perfect creation. He knew that us being the created in his own image, that we would rebel against that and bring forth brokenness in the world. And yet he still created the world. And he knew that one day he was going to come as a baby, live a perfect life, and die a perfect death to redeem those people. And he still created us to begin with. Which is, I think, really important to think about. That in the midst of creation, God made all these perfect things, and then he placed us in the middle of it, knowing that we were going to destroy his creation, and knowing that one day Jesus was going to have to come, live a perfect life, die a perfect death, and be resurrected from the dead in order to redeem all of this. And he still did it. Because that was part of the purpose. That was part of the plan all along. There are highs and lows along this journey, but it was always a part of the plan. The cross was always a part of this. He rose victoriously. He died sacrificially. It was all a part of it because he did that for you and for me. And it's important for us to think about this restored kingdom is not ruled by some tyrant or some angry king, but it's ruled by a good father who is willing to sacrifice his own son for us. Like, that is the kingdom that we're talking about here, the kingdom that is being restored here on earth. So what about your purpose? How does a person figure out what their purpose is? Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to remember the gospel. We need to remember the gospel because the gospel is the fuel that propels us on this journey. Without the gospel, our purpose is going to be rooted in new law or this exhausting idea that you will never be able to fulfill the purpose that you have on your life. And so you're constantly feeling shame and guilt and unfulfilled. But with the gospel, we can see how these two play a part together. And so before you do that, I have this very simple way of understanding the gospel because I'm a very simple person. I'm not like I'm basic. All right, guys. And so these are the 5 gospel lessons. You've heard me say these before if you've been with us before. And we're going to do the 5 gospel lessons, and then we're going to jump into Matthew chapter 5. But this is setting the stage for all of this. So the first S is sin. Sin is anytime we choose what we want over what God wants for us. And we see sin in the first act in the garden when Adam and Eve chose to eat of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because they did not trust fully God. And they wanted more. They wanted to be like God. And we see sin entering into the world there. And the second S comes forth is this separation. Before sin entered into the world, man and God, they walked together in the coolness of the day. But when sin entered into the world, the first response that Adam and Eve was to feel shame and to hide from God. For the very first time, they hid from God. There was this separation that they experienced. And we see that separation happen in our own life between us and God. When we sin, we feel this disconnect from God. But we also feel this between us and people that we care about. It doesn't take very long for me to help you understand, like, hey, husband, wife, when you sin against your spouse, there becomes a separation that has to be mended right there, right? Or you can think about a friendship that you once had, but is no longer a part of your friend circle. You're not texting them, you're not talking to them on a regular basis. But you could probably trace that back to a sin or a series of sins that were created to bring forth that fracture, that separation, because sin always leads to separation. And that separation, it demands a sacrifice. In Genesis 3, when sin enters into the world, the first thing that happens after God explains to them the repercussions of that sin, blood was shed, an animal was sacrificed to make garments for Adam and Eve. A sacrifice was made to cleanse that separation. And then we see throughout the Old Testament sacrifice happening over and over and over. The high priest, like the main pastor of that time, every year would bring forth a spotless lamb and spill its blood in the Holy of Holies to atone for the sins, or to make right the sins of all mankind, because sin brings forth separation. It demands a sacrifice, and that sacrifice was only limited. People sinned again, and there had to be another sacrifice made. But one day, a baby was born in a manger. David was anointed king in Bethlehem. And he lived a perfect life, and he died a perfect death, and he was a perfect sacrifice for the sin that led to separation. It was a one-time for all-time sacrifice. So no longer do people need to continue to make these sacrifices. No longer does other blood have to be shed. Jesus' blood was shed for us. Nothing that you did is all that he did for us. And so our response is the fourth S. It's not to try harder. It's to simply surrender. It's to surrender our life. Not try to do more, but to stop trying and just begin to trust Jesus. This beautiful thing happens. This beautiful thing happens when we surrender our life. It's by the grace of God through faith in him that we were made right. That's Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. When we surrender our life to him, we then can find our purpose. Because he doesn't take away all the things that we love. He doesn't begin to rule us with this iron fist, right? He's a good father, not an evil tyrant. He sends us into the world. He sends us into the world to be a part of restoring his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, if you remember that phrase in the Lord's Prayer. So he sends us into the world, and that is where we found our purpose. We are a part of God restoring the kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven, and sharing that good news with everyone that we can come in contact with the people that he places in our circles of where we live, work, and play. This is our purpose. This is what he's done for us. And so let's look back at Matthew chapter 5. Let's look at those first 12 verses that we've been talking about. And then I want us to think about how we can find our unique purpose in that. So Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12 says this. Seeing the crowd, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And blessed are the peacemakers, those who find themselves in the middle of everything and never finding a side, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account? Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Your purpose is to allow God to send you into every part of the world that He's created. No matter your story, no matter who you identify with, in all of these people that are sitting here listening to this sermon that Jesus is preaching, all of these people that have been healed and restored from their brokenness, they're all sitting there listening to Jesus, and He's saying, hey, you have a purpose. You're no longer a beggar, you're a worshiper. You have a purpose. It's to share this with those that are around you. And some of you may never leave a 20-mile radius. And that's okay, because that was the life of Jesus. He didn't leave a 20-mile radius. He was posted up in that little circle. But then others may travel the world and have influence. Some may be teachers or doctors or professors, or maybe professional gamers. I don't know, that's a thing now. But it doesn't matter, because so often we associate our vocation or our job with our purpose. It's, hey, what is your purpose? It's to be this. But what happens when you lose your vocation, when you lose your job, when that's taken away from you, you no longer have a purpose. And that is not at all what Jesus is talking about. Your purpose is not found in what you do. Your purpose is found in whose you are. You are a child of the King. You've been restored. You were living in brokenness. For those who are in Christ, you were living in brokenness, and you're restored into the kingdom of God. And so your identity is not found in what you do. Your identity is found in Jesus and Jesus alone. And He gives you life. He calls you a son and a daughter. And so we so often associate our vocation with our purpose, but our purpose is to bring the restored kingdom to the lives of those that God has placed in our path. And so, in order to find our purpose, we need to begin to be better at doing a few things. As we're living our life, as we're going about our daily life in the circles of where we live, work, and play, we need to begin to spot the broken kingdom around us. That's the first thing. That there are people all around us living in this broken kingdom, and so often we don't realize it. They're living in this brokenness, and we are focused on ourselves. We're focused on how we look and how we show up and what's best for us. And we often miss out on us. But if you've ever gone on a mission trip or gone into a lower resourced area, it's not hard before you can see the brokenness around you. And your heart naturally begins to break for the brokenness that's around you. That is part of the way God wired us. Is because we are restorers of the broken kingdom. And so, as our heart begins to break like Jesus's did, we think about the way Jesus lived. He spent His time with those people who were broken. When He was confronted, Jesus responded to those who were religious of that day. He said, it's the sick that need the doctor, not the people who are well. And so I am about trying to bring life to those who are sick. So we begin to spot the broken kingdom like Jesus did. He stops and He interacts with these people. And He speaks to these people and He touches these people. And when we stop and interact with these people who live on the margins, we begin to spot the brokenness in their own life. They're no longer a beggar, but they're a person with a story. They're a person that has experienced a significant amount of brokenness. And now we have something to offer them. Because Jesus is offering to restore the kingdom in people's lives for anyone that places their trust and faith in Him. And so we're not just saying, hey, go in peace, be well, right? But we can offer people something that can actually transform their life and save their life, which is the gospel. I was talking with a young girl last night. She's a cancer survivor. She had brain cancer, and it's kind of messed with the way that she interacts with the world. She can barely speak or walk and all these kinds of things. And she said to me, God saved my life. Because she has been able to survive this after a couple different flare-ups. And I told her, with full conviction, and I told her, God saved my life too. Because without God in my life, I do not know where I would be. But statistically, I would not be here. We'll talk about that in a second. So it's not enough for us just to spot the broken kingdom around us. It would be like having a vaccine to the coronavirus early on and being like, oh yeah, I can stop this, but I'm just holding on to it. Right? There's panic all around you, but you're not offering a cure. When we spot the brokenness in people's life, we now have a decision to make. We can try to be the hero and try to fix the brokenness in their life, which is often what we find ourselves doing. Trying to do good, but what we're doing is rooted in kind of this self-gratitude, or we have this hero complex, like, hey, look at me, I'm awesome. Hey, these people are lower than me in life, and so I'm going to try to help them out. Hey, make sure you take a picture. And there's this pride that wells up in us. And helping those people is not bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying it's the motives and why we're helping these people that is what Jesus is asking us about. He's telling us, hey, Jesus lived in the margin, and Jesus is the only one that can really make their problems go away. We can give some people some money, we can give some people some food, but they're still going to continue to live in brokenness. They might just not be hungry right now. But when we can offer people restoration to their broken lives, that is what helps people no longer be hungry anymore, not just full for the moment. That's what Jesus is offering here in the Sermon on the Mount. He's looking at all of these people who've been living in brokenness, and they've been healed, and he's saying, no, this isn't just a full belly for the moment. You now can live in the restored kingdom. You no longer have to experience this brokenness, this perpetual brokenness in your life. And so, Jesus is calling us to not only spot the broken kingdom, but invite others into this restored kingdom that we're walking in. This is this beautiful picture of the gospel. We didn't do anything to walk into the gospel. It was all that he did. All we did was surrender, and he brought us into the gospel, into the kingdom. And that's all we are doing is when we're talking with people, we're interacting with these people that God places on our paths. We're not saying, hey, I'm this awesome person. I did all these great things to make my life better. We're saying, hey, man, I just surrendered. And God brought me into this broken kingdom. And some of you might be thinking, man, like, that sounds awesome, but I have some people in my life that have been trying to come to church for a long time. I've been begging them, I've been bribing them, and they're still not coming. How long do I have to keep asking them? How long is it going to take? But one thing we do need to remember is restoration takes time. And everyone has a different and unique timeline. Everyone. And so for us to expect person A to have the same exact experience with God as you did is not only unfair, it's kind of unreasonable. Because we all have different stories. We all have different hang-ups. We all have different emotional baggage that we're carrying around. And so our role is not to be the hero, it's just to be the guide. It's to walk along with them in their journey of faith and help continue to point them towards the gospel, point them towards Jesus, because he is the one that restores life. God is the one that brings the growth. When I struggle in this, I like to think about the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, what happened is God told his people there was a promised land that he was giving them. And then they went through a series of trials before they got there, if you're aware of what's happening. But every time God was faithful to bring them, to deliver them out of the hands of their enemy. He would tell them, hey, build this remembrance stone, build this altar so that you will not forget what God has done in your life. And the generations after you will not forget that I have and will always be faithful. And so when you struggle in your own faith and in the faith journey of other people around you, remember that restoration takes time. But God is faithful, and He will continue to be faithful along the way. So as we think about these things that we talked about, what is God speaking directly to you about? What would it look like for you to begin to look at the world around you with these new glasses and not just take the truth that you've seen and go about your day like nothing changed? Because we've seen some of these things before, but now the question is, how are we going to show up? What about our own life? Are we experiencing this brokenness? So I want you to think about your own timeline of faith. Where would you consider yourself? Would you say, man, like I'm at the beginning of that timeline? I don't know if I'm even, like, I'm checking this out. To you, I say, welcome. That is a perfect place to be. We hope that we can be a great guide as you explore faith with us. And maybe you would say, like, hey, yeah, I've crossed the line of faith, but right now, man, like I'm angry with God, or I feel distant from Him. I feel like something happened in my life and He should have protected me from this and He didn't. And to you, I want to let you know that He has not forgotten about you. And that He is faithful. It might not seem like it right now, but He is working all of these things out for your good. So I want us to do this together. Take a look back on your life, as far back as you can remember. And begin to make a timeline of your own life. It might look like this. There's going to be some lows and there's going to be some highs. There's going to be some high highs and some low lows and some stuff in between. But I want you to begin to make a timeline of your life. My timeline looks like this. So I put this low point towards the beginning of my life. This is when my mom and dad, they got divorced. I didn't realize it when I was at the age that I was, but it was significant in my life. It began this narrative that I believed for a very long time that I did not have a father in this world. And that my father would always let me down. Because the next low point is this moment when, or the high point that's right above the time. Hey, I became a big brother. That was awesome, right? But this next low point was when I was an adolescent. My dad went to prison. And my stepdad, my mom had remarried. My stepdad was super abusive, emotionally and physically abusive, and it was difficult. And so this seed of doubt that was placed in my heart and in my mind when I was a kid of like, hey, your dad isn't there and you're not worthy to have a father, or whatever I began to believe, is just pressed even deeper in this moment, isn't it? What was I going to do? That when I said, like, the statistics say that I should not be here, those are true statistics. My dad was in prison for most of my adolescence. And while that was happening, my stepdad was being very, very abusive, very, very violent, and setting me on a trajectory far away from God and towards a life of corruption, really. But somehow, through the grace of God, someone invited me to church. It wasn't the first time I went to church. But it was the first time that I remember hearing the gospel, that I had sinned, that led to separation, that demanded a sacrifice, and Jesus was that sacrifice, and my response was to surrender. It was the first time that I remember understanding that. I laid my life down. I surrendered my life in that moment. As a 13-year-old boy, surrendered my life down to Him. And in that moment, God spoke to me, and He said this. Psalm 68:5 says, I am a father to those who are fatherless. And all of that guilt and shame that I had been carrying around with me was released. But that doesn't mean that only good things happen from then on. Because as you can see, there's another low point, a pretty significantly low point. My dad, he struggled with mental health issues. And he took his own life 2 weeks before my wedding. So forever, a significantly low point in my life is going to be coupled with a significantly high point. And without the grace of God, that's just going to ram further deep in my heart that I don't deserve to have a father. But what Jesus is telling me through the gospel is, no. You are my son. I'm a father to the fatherless. And we had some struggles in fertility, and we got to adopt our daughter. And we all have timelines like this, right? So what I want you to do is think about your own life. What are some significant moments that happened in it? Some highs and maybe some lows. I've found that the lows have shaped me more than the highs, but not all of us are like that. So think about your own life. What are some highs and lows? What is the journey? What is the story that God has been writing for you individually? Your unique story. Because all these people that were listening to Jesus, these broken people, these meek people, they all had this unique story, and Jesus didn't just pass by them. He wanted to know their story, and he wanted to use their story to glorify his name. So all of you sitting here today have a unique story that God has given you. He's been writing for you, highs and lows. And none of those things, none of those moments have been on accident. And yeah, you might think, why would this happen to me? But he redeems all of these things because he's restoring the broken kingdom that we're living in. So what is your story? What does it look like? Think about highs and lows. And then as you're thinking about your story, as you're thinking about your timeline, is there a moment where you can clearly identify, like, hey, this is the line of faith for me. I remember surrendering my life in this moment. That I was living in brokenness. And I got to step across this line of faith. And I experienced restoration. And I experienced God sending me into the world to make a difference. If you don't have that on your timeline, that's fine. I'm so glad, I'm really glad that you're here. I would love to set up coffee or lunch, because this is what I believe. Every person's story is significant. Everyone has their own journey. And it doesn't have to look like mine, because mine doesn't look like yours. But what I do believe is that you have a purpose that God has uniquely given you to impact the world around you. And that without you fulfilling your purpose, there are people around you that will not be impacted by the love of Jesus. And so I deeply want for you to explore that in your own life. What would it look like for you to take the step over the timeline of faith? What steps do you need to take before that? I would love to have a conversation with you. But maybe you've already taken that step. And maybe you want to take an evaluation of your life, and you're like, Kyle, my life is bottomed out. And one of the things that I've experienced is from the bottom, my lowest low, when I cry out to Jesus, sometimes, just want to be honest, it doesn't feel like he hears me. Maybe you've experienced that. There's been a prayer that I've prayed over and over in my life. God, I know you're in control, but it just doesn't feel like it right now. I prayed that when my dad passed away. I prayed that when we had a boy that we thought we were going to adopt that got ripped out of our hands. But I finished that prayer with, but I trust you. God, I know you're in control. It just doesn't feel like it right now, but I trust you. I trust because I've been able to look back and seen how he has been faithful, and trust that he will continue to be faithful. That he will always keep his word. So I don't know where you are today. What I want you to do is to map your faith journey out in your own minds. And I want to challenge you to think about that timeline of faith and where that looks like in your journey. We cannot forget our purpose, but we can also not forget the process, and we're all part of the process. We all have a story. So, here's the question that we always ask every week. God, how do you want me to respond? Maybe that is placing your faith in Jesus. And if you want to do that, I would love to talk to you about that right now. And maybe it is making amends with God because you've been angry with him for a long time. We're going to provide for you several moments. We're going to sing a couple more songs. We want you to experience a restored kingdom in your own life. Whatever you need to do to navigate that, my prayer is that you will not be a beggar today when you leave here, like all of these people that Jesus is talking to at the Sermon on the Mount. That you will leave here a true worshiper of God, truly experiencing not brokenness, but restoration.